Not matter whether it is direct or indirect, prolonged racial trauma causes race-based traumatic stress. It's an unclassified mental health disorder with symptoms that are similar to PTSD. So for more on this topic, we're joined this morning by Roxanne Francis. She's a social worker, psychotherapist, and expert on anti-Black racism and racial trauma. Great to have you with us here this morning, Roxanne.
Thanks for having me, Anne-Marie.
You know, we've had 3 conversations around race so far this morning, and all of them have touched on what we are going to talk about today. First of all, what are some of the unobvious causes of racial trauma?
Well, we know about what's happening in the news, we know about the trial, but other things include things like microaggressions, things like being the only person in the room who's racialized, traumatic events, anything that's related to crime in the news as it relates to a person of color. A lot of these things can cause race-based traumatic stress. And
those are the unobvious ones. Obviously, there's the major triggers like seeing things covered on the news, for example.
Right.
What are some of the symptoms of race-based traumatic stress? How do you know this is what you're experiencing?
A lot of people talk about this unexplained feeling of grief, of anger, of despair, and hopelessness. But there's also the feelings of being what people call hypersensitivity to, things like the microaggressions, or even concerns about your own children. For example, being very concerned about what your children were in public, about how they interact with other people, making sure that they're extremely polite so that other people don't think negatively of them. Some of these things really impact individuals. People have trouble sleeping. People have trouble connecting with other people of other races. It can be really challenging.
Mm-hmm. One of the mothers that we were just speaking to in our last hour was talking about exactly that hypervigilance and awareness when you or your children are out in the world about how they may or may not be perceived. According to Mental Health America, unlike PTSD, race-based traumatic stress is not considered a mental health disorder at this time. Why?
Well, there are a lot of changes that I think people have to make if it is considered a mental health disorder that I don't think the society is ready to make. For example, if we actually classify it as a mental health disorder, we will have to make strides to treat it. And that will require changing not just medical systems, or policies overall, our health systems, or justice systems, or education systems, and our systems of government. All of these things will have to be addressed. And unfortunately, I don't think our world is ready to make those large-scale changes at the moment.
Roxanne, one of the things that we haven't touched too much on is the physical symptoms that can show when you're having race-based traumatic stress. What are some of the physical symptoms?
Well, some of these things mirror, like we said, PTSD. People can have flashbacks. People can have moments where they kind of zone out or dissociate. People have difficulty sleeping. They are very sensitive to things in their environment, have trouble eating. Sometimes people lose weight or gain weight. Oftentimes people will pull away from others and have trouble socializing. So some of these things are things to look out for.
You made an interesting comparison to post-traumatic stress disorder. And, when you talk about war, for example, years ago, decades ago, when soldiers would come back suffering from what we would now call PTSD, it was called being shell-shocked. And it was considered part of coming home of being a soldier, but there was never any classification or help for it until the classification came. If you believe that you're suffering from race-based traumatic stress, what should you do?
I think it's really important to get around other people who are dealing with the same thing. Just like many of those soldiers who returned from war, when they connected with each other, they realized that it was something that they were dealing with as a group. And there is solace to be found in that. So, it's really important to connect with other people who are managing the same symptoms. The other thing to consider is seeing a therapist. There are many therapists out there who are equipped to manage race-based traumatic stress. And it's not, there's nothing negative in terms of asking for a therapist.